right? So now that y'all seen that, you go back to this demon seed. Now, I showed y'all, it said that they was making them strange language, mildly disturbed Harris teen. Following day, Proteus asked Harris for a new terminal, right? A new terminal. They tell you if you're about to die, you're terminally ill, right? In order to study man, right? He need a new method of studying the man. This is the Babylonian conspiracy right here to subjugate us for the second run. Watch. His isometric body and his glass jaw mind. When Harris refuses, Proteus demands to know when it will be let out of its box. Pandora's box, remember? So when you get those knocks and you go to collecting your artifacts in your travels, they call that opening Pandora's box. So this is telling you there's a man that want to be a traveling man, right? But somebody won't allow him to attain the knowledge. Go watch the movie Red October about the Irish boy that wanted to be a rocket scientist and everybody was scared to let him think. And then look at Stephen Hawking. Let's look at Stephen Hawking. You see what happened to him, and this is why didn't nobody want them to use their brain, because it does this to him. Okay, first we look at Stephen Hawking. In college, rowing, because he was on the row team. See? Now look, Oxford University's rowing club practices for a race in 2010. Hawkins had served as the coxswain for the school's team nearly 5 decades earlier. So he was on the rowing team. Here's a picture of him. See him right here? Look at him here. This is why we can't get reparations, because we let them motherfuckers make this shit. Shit like this. That's a Ghulam. See this? This bullshit. They wasn't inbred Neanderthals. They were Ghulams. They were nanotechnological, failing, self-replicating technology. And they looked it like this. That's what your Adam Kadmon looked it like. Your Ghulam. I didn't even know this picture was going to pop up. This is what Elijah Muhammad calls the grafted devil. That's your Adam. This is what Adam looked like. I'm surprised I even ran across this. Every other human that you see was already here. All of the nations of the earth. And everywhere the Babylonians went, they started some stuff from the day they came. All right. Let's go back to that page. Let's see. This computer runs slow. So the next thing I'm going to do, see, this is what this was all about. See, when they were looking like this, they women still looked it like this. These women didn't like that. So these that looked it like that did whatever they wanted to that, because there was no rules, regulations, and they didn't have wives, families, and nothing like that. They left the women. They just came through, snatch her by her hair, drag her, rape her, and leave her where she at. If she get pregnant, she might drop the baby wherever she at. So that's what everything in the African-American Holocaust that they call a slave trade, where we was prisoners of POWs, was prisoners of war, that was revenge. That was revenge for paying something that looked like this. She can't never have nothing of beauty, because every time she go home, this is what she got to get. Right? So she complained to the queen. She got a portal. Anyway, that ain't why we here. This is why we here. When he started thinking, this is what happens. This was the problem with the queen of heaven and earth. When he started thinking, this is what happens. Now, where do I verify this with? I go over here to the YouTube, and I pull up Francis Welsing. And she debating with this guy. In this debate with William Shockley, it's a pretty lengthy debate. but she goes into the disease and what it does.
Implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans.
If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out in the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
Back in the 70s, a man named Dr. William Shockley, a noted scientist, embarked upon the mission of proving to the world that black people are genetically inferior, without, I might add, the benefit of any formal background in genetics. He became front-page news and won headlines with his controversial views. On campus after campus, unrest followed his every visit. My position then and now is that if a supremacist cannot be rationally debated, perhaps he has a point. After the debate you're now going to see, Dr. Shockley went back into oblivion. I don't claim that the 1973 interview did it alone, but I am of the opinion that it helped. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, racial superiority with Dr. William Shockley.
We have two very prominent educators, scholars on Black Journal tonight, and we feel that it is important to defend the First Amendment rights of all Americans. Dr. William Shockley, one of our guests, has had quite a difficult time speaking at some universities, and particularly some black college students.
This is where she started going into it.
Black, brown, red, and yellow people. And the paper was presented to the Americans at the National Medical Association, the section on psychiatry, in neurology, because back in 1969, the Black Caucus in the American Psychiatric Association, we had said that racism, and when we talk about racism, we're talking about the white supremacy behavior of white people. That racism was the #1 mental health problem in the nation, and it was the #1 cause of other mental health problems. And I wanted to understand what this thing of racism really is all about, because it's the thing that has caused woe and misery and suffering for the vast majority of the people on this planet that are classified as non-white. And in my attempt to understand why the necessity of white people to keep saying that white is superior and that the condition of non-white is inferior. And the more I thought about it, in conjunction with an idea that a friend of mine had, that racism was a worldwide behavioral system for the maintenance of white supremacy by a small minority of people, I put those ideas together with what we know about genetics, what we know about the condition of skin whiteness itself. The condition of skin whiteness is the genetic inability to produce skin pigment called melanin. This is a genetic recessive trait. It is a genetic deficiency state, not as defined by Francis Welsing, but defined by geneticists and dermatologists, that the inability to produce the skin pigment of melanin or melanin pigment is described as albinism. And I think that white people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to...
I got to stop right there. I got to go back, because listen to what she said carefully, because I've been telling y'all, America the great melding pot. And the whole thing, and I'm going to show y'all over time, the whole thing of this whole racism stuff is to create a dichotomy that forces two people that would not normally in their own arenas associate with each other in order to exchange birth fluids in order to clean up the genetics, because they needed something called a recovery factor and a healing factor for what they done to them in Babylon. Now listen to what she say.
Annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that...
Now, this is where she about to go into why she's saying that if they're going to call us inferior, then this is the issues that they got to deal with for. Now, remember, the guy is a eugenicist. That means that he believed in inferior genetics being annihilated so that no defects carry on in the human population. That's what eugenicists believe. But now, watch how she explained the rationale of a trained eugenicist and how irrational what they are saying is. Listen.
That it is of prime importance for the majority of people in the world to understand why it is that white people have to, the effective majority, large numbers of white people, have to move in a hostile and an aggressive way against people of color and have to constantly focus on it's you who's genetically inferior because they realize that there's something wrong with their genetic status. Now,
may I take a call?
Oh, sure,
all
please.
Right. Let me, so that, because we have a number of calls, and we'll see what the public wants to find out also. Just 1 second. Hello, go ahead, please. You're on Black Journal.
I would like to ask a question. Why does the doctor feel that his theory, Dr. Shockley, why did you feel that your theory is correct?
Well, let me say that's a long question. Let me point out one aspect. It's a question that calls for a very long answer. I think I might just at this point say that in a time like 1 hour, we may expose a problem and encourage thinking about it, and this is a very valuable thing. But to cover either Dr. Welsing's views or mine, and let me say here are, just to show that these things exist, is a pamphlet that she was good enough to give me some time ago.
This one's upside down.
Well, that one's upside down. Yeah, thank you.
Right.
And this is one of my own. It's actually a collection of a debate.
The Imperative of Ethnic Education is yours.
This is the issue of the journal. Mine was, the title of my paper is somewhat different from this, but I want to say that speaking for myself, if people would like to write to me at Stanford University, I have a post box there, post box S, which is the same as Shockley and Stanford. I will try to supply more information, and I'm sure Dr. Welsing will say what she can do about telling people how to reach her pamphlet. But now,
okay, we'll speed this up.
And we'd like to get to as many as possible. If you could make your answers, not to compromise your explanation, but if you could make your answers as succinct, I would appreciate it, because we'd like to involve the public as much as we can. 1 moment, please. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if Dr. Shockley would explain the basic difference between the course he is taking in explaining white supremacy and the course that Hitler took during the Nazism reign.
Thank you.
well, there are enormous differences. In fact, the lesson...
I think that there's a major difference between what Dr. Shockley is doing. I don't think that Dr. Shockley is fully aware of what he is doing and why he is doing what he's doing. But the long range...
You hear what she
I
said?
think that there's a major difference between what Dr. Shockley is doing. I don't think that Dr. Shockley is fully aware of what he is doing and why.
Now, notice that this guy is a European-trained doctor. She went to the same schools he went to. He's not a specialist in the field. She is, and she's saying he don't have a clue what he doing, and he need to figure it out. But watch what she say.
Why he is doing what he's doing. But the long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans. Number two, he was aware that the Semites had genetically dominant material, genetic material to the Aryans. And if we begin to understand the way that people who were in Europe at the time that the Semites arrived from Africa, when the Semites...
Now, Semite comes from the root word semi, which means half. Now, remember, I told y'all that the Moors, right, it was two factions of Moors. And these Moors were half-breeds. They call them conquistadors. And they set up the port in Puerto Rico because they came over here to get gold to win favor with the Anunnaki. They was trading the gold, which was the cause of a lot of problems because the Moors gave the Khazarians the Babylonian money magic because they had rules that they had to abide by, and that it would take a massive effort to break those rules or change them. But somewhere over there, the Moors gave them more information than they were supposed to. which came out to equivalent to 32 degrees of information. The 32 degrees of information is predicated upon what you call the 3-knock principle. If they'd have been given the whole 33 degrees, we'd have been in trouble. So the last degree, the third degree, the 33rd and the third, the 1/3 part, the 1 1/3, the one, the chosen son of the 13, he the only one that'll be able to break past the 33 when he raised himself. So that's why it's an honorary 1 1/3. Now, if they've been doing this to us with less than 32 degrees of knowledge. Now, 32 degrees is the freezing point. Now, imagine if one of us came along and had 40 degrees of knowledge. Just 40.
White people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color, than black people.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I think
now,
blacks apparently have higher
would you suggest that all of these white people who are carrying these defective genes, you know, whose families may carry these defective genes, that they be examined and it would be suggested to them that they be sterilized? Would you suggest this?
Yes, I think I would, probably, in general. Go ahead, you're up.
Now, the next thing is when she really go into it, because she don't really want to touch on it, because she don't want to expose the doctrine of the great melting pot in the 1 drop of blood, because she's not allowed to according to the contract. If she exposes it according to the contract, where we can figure it out too easy, it'll put her in an adverse condition and probably cost her life. So you look at Dr. Bobby E. Wright's psychopathic racial personality, and you look at how long he lived, and you'll understand it. So she goes in a little further right here.
Interesting is in the study of biology, biologists who have studied evolution, one of the very interesting things that they say is that the more functional skin pigment cells in the animal kingdom, the higher you are on the scale of phylogenetic ascension. In other words, nature in the course of evolution went to its highest state when it produced a cell that could produce pigment, and that we were sliding backwards. The mutation to albinism is a step backwards in the scale of evolution.
Now she said the loss of the skin pigment is a regression in evolution, but actually it's not a regression in evolution. It is an arrested evolution. It's when they made them. They consciously created a condition where they could keep them permanent slaves using Jacob's ladder, where they could always keep them jumping back into a body without ever having any knowledge higher than like 3rd grade. Right? So that's what the 33 degrees is all about, the 3rd degree. Because their knowledge never attained what we would consider a 3rd grader today. Right? That's why we had to be regressed to experience what we put them through. We don't get punished for our sins. We get punished by them. And the sins are the ones that look like Francis Welsing right there with that beautiful afro, was to idle stand by and allow those people to be mistreated, and those women to never have families and to never raise children. So Tawa Ert, the great mother, told the Queen of Heaven and Earth how to fix it. Right? She gave her the instructions on how to fix it. And when the Queen of Heaven and Earth gave the instructions to fix it, that is when all hell broke loose on Earth, and we are just now getting to the point when we can recover from it. But let's listen to what the anomaly that affected Dr. Richard Hawkins does.
Aware of that, Dr. Shockley?
No, I'm not aware of that particular one. I am aware of another basic genetic difference, and that is that the rate of maturation of a neurological system gets...
Let's go back.
Backwards. The mutation to albinism is a step backwards in the scale of evolution. Are you aware of that, Dr. Shockley?
No, I'm not aware of that particular one. I am aware of another basic genetic difference, and that is that the rate of maturation of a neurological system gets longer and longer the more advanced the animal is. And that is one of the items on the racial difference, that the neurological development of blacks is faster than whites. Black babies walk on the average a month earlier than white babies. And the period of
black
gestation...
people are much more creative also than white.
Dr. Wells, Shockley, correct me if I'm incorrect.
Okay, now, you hear what she said about black people being more creative. The creative aspect was what you call your God gene. That's your God aspect, right? So when she said black people was more creative, now you get to see why Oscar was a black man. Black people was denied getting Oscars, Grammys, and awards because it wasn't for them. These people had to get their drop of blood and get back into and get into the human family at the agreement of the elder gods, what they call the ancient ones, the ones that the great mother said to clean it up. Now watch what happens. Pay attention, because she's going to get into it. Now remember, the goal was to not just be an intellectual man, but a creative man. The intellectual, that's the knowledge. That's the inky pillar of Boaz, but you want to be the creative man. You want, now that's where the problem come in, because that's in Lil's domain. That's ascension, and he blocked the ascension at what they call Jacob's ladder by creating what they call a loop for something called a walk-in. Now Ruth Montgomery do a book called Strangers Among Us to talk about the walk-ins. Now let's check out some more of this.
Didn't the Giselle schedule, which tested the intelligence of children, make a correlative between intelligence and walking early?
Yes.
And I would think it probably would have been negative.
No, it was not. It was positive.
Well,
the motor skills on the Giselle schedule indicated that earlier precocious walking.
Okay, now they're talking about psychomotor skills. Now they're getting into the central nervous system and the processes of the mind and how the mind affects the body and how all of this comes together. Now here in the brain, right behind the forehead, you got what you call your prefrontal lobe. In the prefrontal lobe, you got what they call mirror cells that gives you a condition called empathy. You become empathetic, not sympathetic. To have sympathy with somebody is to look at them and not really give a fuck, but understand what they're going through. That's sociopathic. That's against the social norm. Sociopath means that which is not conducive to the society, right? So when that condition happens, they don't have the heart to be creative. So this is what Francis Wells is talking about. They're not being creative. Dr. Amos Wilson wrote in The Psychological Development of the Black Child about the accelerated development of the child from fetal development in the womb all the way into toddler going into adolescence. It's not till around 7 years of age that you experience a rapid decline in the intelligence of a black child in the inner city. Notice he said inner city because it's a difference. The structure of education is designed to slow the brain down, and this is why. Now watch what happened next.
Children. There was a correlation between that and high intelligence.
This may be true. It might be true within a group. I'm not sure of that.
Well, maybe
I know that there is a correlation in terms of things earlier than walking. At the 6-month stage, Nancy Bailey at Berkeley has established that white children who come from the most advanced families and who later, when they become older, are out at the top, at the first 6 months they are relatively retarded compared to children who are from families of less accomplishment.
Now notice you said that upper echelon white children are born pretty much retarded. He said that, and I'm going to let him say it again because I want y'all to hear this, because what they are explaining to you is the suffering. Why black people had to go through this bullshit in order to clean this shit up. Now later on I'm going to give y'all more references on the whole matter about this, but it's all in plain sight. None of this shit ain't no secret. So I'm going to move him back a little bit more, and I want him to tell y'all again. Listen.
In terms of things earlier than walking, at the 6-month stage, Nancy Bailey at Berkeley has established that white children who come from the most advanced families and who later, when they become older, are out at the top, at the first 6 months they are relatively retarded compared to children who are from families of less accomplishment and who don't go as far. But this, so there are a number of these things certainly to be brought in.
Right.
But this
Giselle schedule is a very authentic, accepted, institutional psychological experiment.
So is the Nancy Bailey early test.
I'd like to take another call. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hello. This question is addressed to Dr. Welsing. First, I would like to say that Mr. Brown and Dr. Welsing disprove immediately Dr. Shockley's concept, because here we have two highly intelligent, gifted people. And by getting this out of the way, Dr. Welsing, wouldn't you agree that there is a strong genetic component to the inheritance of intelligence? Geneticists believe that 80% component is hereditary. Let me finish, Dr. Welsing. And then also, I think the association of skin color with intelligence is an erroneous concept. And I want your views on this. Isn't it true that the historic fate of black people, the tragic deprivation, the conditions under which they were raised, any people raised under these conditions would have an hereditary, evolutionary background, which could lead to poor capacity to generalize, to
You're getting a little long with the question. I'm going to fast forward.
conceptualize, to create. Now, this is not a race.
No, I do not feel that there's any evidence to suggest that 80% of the ability to come to terms with your environment that has to do with heredity. I think that much of it has to do with the environmental opportunity that the genetic material is exposed to. I think that if we look at the black people, if we just take the black group, and we look at those people who have been able to achieve, and we look at their backgrounds, we will find that they have had substantial social and economic opportunities that maybe some of the segment of the black population has not had. We'll find the same thing in the white group. Those white people who have been socioeconomically deprived and at the bottom of the economic scale for whites, that these people are not performing in the same way that people who have extended socioeconomic opportunities.
Now, what she's saying is the society withholding the finance interferes with the development of the intellect and the education. The process by which this works is the oppression creates a delirium, right? The delirium is called the word evades me right now, but it's a mild form of confusion. And you so focus on escaping the oppression, you have no opportunity to develop the intellect in order to get from under the oppression. That's the structure of the system that she's explaining.
One of the very interesting things is that white women are now talking about women's liberation, and they are looking at their performance relative to white men, and they are saying, and all of the spokesmen for white women, and men and women are also saying, that the reason that the white woman has less confidence in her performance and is not performing as well, relatively speaking, as the white male has been the attitudes within the white family as to the role of the woman versus the role of the man. Now, what is...
Okay, now what she's talking about is historically, before the first order to clean the European up was given by the Queen, and they start to migrate into Europe to amalgamate, to clear the genetic defects. When that took place, this is what she's talking about. And so
interesting is that when white people are looking at the difference in the performance of the white woman and the white man on IQ tests, they can account for that on the basis of environmental influences. However, when they
see, now they saying that they get a white woman an excuse if she don't perform, and that's because they recognize, they acknowledge in the white supremacist system that the white woman has to be subjugated. They acknowledge that that's part of the white supremacy too. The reason being is because she has what you call a life portal. So the white woman, by the order of the Queen of Heaven and Earth, was given the right to ascend first because she could directly, through the portal of life, affect her mitochondrial in the assimilation of what you call the creative force through the mitochondrial that's expressed through the X chromosome. In Leo, being androgynous, who became a homosexual, he did not like the X chromosome being the source of the creative gene. And this is what made the war in heaven. Now, when you get into it a little deeper,
shift over into looking at whites relative to people of color, somehow they want to drop that understanding and that awareness.
It's been interesting, to say the least. I'm happy you had your say, Dr. Shockley and Dr. Welsing. I'm happy you had yours, and thank you for being on Black Journal.
Now, I missed the name of the disease. Because she named it. When she named it,
why it is that you have, first of all, you have a very large segment of the black population who are on farms, who are deprived in cities. Why don't you explain at the...
A moment ago, that if there were not a basic, probably because of the reckoning of the lower farm, and so this is definitely unfavorable. It is reproducing far more at the bottom end and not enough to keep even at the top end.
Dr. Shockley,
for whites.
Did you see this picture right here? Remember when Martin Luther King was talking about the grants in one of my videos yesterday? This is what he's talking about, right? He's talking about how this displacement socioeconomic displacement of the rural firms, it has these different effects. And he's writing the numbers down, right?
Let me just finish this. For whites, the number...
I think that, in all fairness, you should explain to the audience why it is that you have, first of all, you have a very large segment of the black population who are on farms, who are deprived in cities. Why don't you explain at the time that you're showing this, who is keeping black people in a situation like they're in? I mean, it could be, you could turn it around the other way, where you could have very large numbers of black...
Now, she asked the question, who keeping black people in a subservient position, right? And saying that you can even turn it around and ask the question the other way. What does she mean?
People who are exposed to educational opportunities like white people, who are exposed to housing, who are exposed to health facilities. Why don't you explain that at the same time that you put figures like that?
Sure, you would explain it.
No, but I think...
See, so she telling him you neglecting the socioeconomic aspect of learning. Basically what she's telling him is, if you don't give a child a learning environment that's conducive to him learning and without restricting his childhood development, right, then you have a functional child, no matter what race he is. And all of the arguments this guy is bringing up is specifically to try to get past the fact that poverty is one of the leading causes of all birth defects, mental illness, and various other health problems are directly related to your economic condition. So in order for them to be able to get their drop of blood, assimilate it, having it ain't enough, you have to be able to activate it. So what were they given to activate it? They were given dance classes. You remember we used to have them doing the waltz and the Tennessee waltz and ballroom dance because they didn't have rhythm as the one drop of blood in the great melding pot. So let me see if I can find this part where she talk about the disease.
If I may, we have a number of people, and we'd like to get to as many as possible. If you could,
gotta be back
make
here
your
earlier.
answers.
One drop of black blood makes you black because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this.
Okay, now the question comes up that now they're having this discussion on inferiority of genetics and superiority of genetics, but there is a chart that you go to determine who is dominant. This is across the board unilaterally. So so you look up genetic dominance chart. Now this is all determining about what you call the demon seed, right? So now you look and you see how the genetic markers right here, these are genetic markers. These tell you how heredity is passed. All of this, right? This is telling you how the genetics is passed, the dominant genes, right? Now, it's a dominance is a relation between two alleles. Now, notice you got the word L in there twice, right? This is the two pillars. The two alleles of a gene, which is like the markers, and their associated phenotype. This is the genetic form of the gene, but not the material inside of it. So this is whether the gene in and of itself is defective. A dominant allele is dominant to a particular allele of the same gene that can be inferred from the context, but it may be recessive to a third one. Remember, 3 knocks and a condemnation of the 4th, right? So now, you look for the scale. How do you determine what's dominant and what's recessive? Okay, so let's see. Scholarly articles for genetic dominance determination. Genetic. Let's see if we can't find something that's real simple, like let's look under images, because you might get a chart under images that go through it and tell you what's dominant and what's not. No, it don't. Genetic dominant determination by race. Let's see what that come up. All right. So we go down, and here's a chart, a race chart. Okay, this one is how is skin color determined in babies? Right? Now, this is the external expression of the gene. Right here. 164, 664, 1564, 2064. This is determining the rate of mutation or differentiation in the dominant recessive. Right here, right, 1,8 to 1,8 is the most recessive point. Right? This is the egg.